want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another episode of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. I'm afraid I cheated just a little bit. I jumped ahead 2 or 3 chapters. No, I didn't really skip them, but in preparing for today's class, it took me much closer to the end of this than what we have been before. And I am reminded of that wonderful and remarkable vision at the time when my mind was allowed to join God's and to perceive his divine plan, which was, of course, kind of like a small computer plugging into the computer of 150 billion galaxies. That day I saw mankind as he'll be one day. The vision that St. John saw in his own remarkable transformational change is true. Someday we will have peace on earth. And I saw man and woman and child working together in harmony. And there was no more war. And of course, as I jumped ahead 2 or 3 chapters, for a moment I touched that great vision of St. John's, which we're going to find in chapter 21, and brought to mind my favorite song. And my favorite song is The Holy City. It was written by Frederick E. Weatherly, and I wonder if as I hear this, and as I've read it, if he didn't have that same vision also. And of course, my favorite singer of this song is a beautiful tenor that comes from one of the religious choirs. And I'm sorry that you can't hear him, but we use this style of microphone so that the recording will be clear for you and not pick up background noises, which restricts us in being able to present such special music. But I thought I would read the words. In the first paragraph, of course, it talks about Israel before the time of Jesus. And then it talks about, the second, talks about Israel during the time, or at the time of the crucifixion. And the very last talks about that great vision that is in chapter 21 of St. John's Revelation, and that same vision I saw when peace came to earth. So the first verse said, "Last night I lay sleeping, and there came a dream so fair. I stood in old Jerusalem, beside the temple there. I heard the children singing, and ever as they sang, methought the voice of angels from heaven in answer rang, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, lift up your gates and sing, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to your King. And then methought my dream was changed. The streets no longer rang. Hushed were the glad hosannas the little children sang. The sun grew dark with mystery. The morn was cold and chilled as the shadow of a cross arose upon a lonely hill. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, hark how the angels sing. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna to your King. And once again, the scene was changed. New earth there seemed to be. I saw the holy city beside a tideless sea. The light of God was on its streets, and the gates were open wide, and all who would might enter, and no one was denied. No need of moon or stars by night, or sun to shine by day. It was the new Jerusalem which would not pass away. So I'm glad I could share my favorite song with you this morning. And now we go to chapter 17, because in the introduction of chapter 17, I wrote those last few lines of that famous song simply because I wanted people to know and to understand that my vision is not the only vision, but that it has been the vision for over 6,000 years of traditional writings to focus upon that day when we would finally at last graduate from these very solid, massive bodies that we have, and we would graduate in peace. So as we enter chapter 17, Babylon, harlot of Rome, and we go to the first verse, I know you have your trusty Odyssey, or you have your New Testament, and all the other books that you need to have to research this, or to verify it, or just simply to look up some of the things that we talk about. Remember, we told you that you really need to look up the things that you have questions about, like barley and wheat and the seasons of the year and Babylon, and to learn the history and the times as they were when Revelation was originally written. It helps us in understanding that to be a part of the great vision that John had as he began his own remarkable transformation on, I'm going to assume it was probably Patmos. If not, it was certainly there that he went through a heavy part of it and laid the groundwork by which we have it today. So in verse 1 it said, there came one of the seven angels which had the seven winds. And we are talking about now, of course, the seven angels of cosmic law. We have passed through the darkness of the purification of the body. We have gone through the heavy throes of the purification of the mind. And now we're going through the final part of this, the purification of the soul. As the soul, of course, is made ready to become a bride of the indwelling Christ. And that in this union we raise to inner peace and to great victory over our lower nature, or shall we say, that mysterious medieval Satan that wandered through Christianity of antiquity. And there came one of the seven angels that had the seven winds. Of course, the seven winds are the seven powers of cosmic law: love, power, wisdom, eternal life, creative work, the peace that passeth all understanding, and of course, oneness with God. So, and said to me, Come hither, I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And this is the collective consciousness of earth, of which all of us are an integral part of. And of course it also represents the attachments that we have had in the corporeal senses as the soul has made its way and journeyed through the world of matter. So fornication in this term means only that we have deviated from natural and cosmic law, that we have been partakers of the way that have brought injury to us. He carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. This represents the collective world as it is enticed by the senses into the numerous things that cause harm and bring harm to it. And as it sits upon the scarlet-colored beast or sacrifice, which has blasphemy, and blasphemy in this case means that we have digressed from natural and cosmic law. And it has 10 horns, meaning that it will rule until we have returned to oneness with God and entered that 7th and final epoch of creation. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hands full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. I think we mentioned this when we talked about the Roman Vatican being a mystery school, and that in the early days the Pope wore purple, which was the color of ascension. And of course the red was the color of sacrifice, and blue was the earthly color of the corporeal nature, coming from the ancient mysteries of Moses. So we see that the woman, though, is dressed in purple and scarlet. So purple is the color of ascension, scarlet is sacrifice. So she will ascend after she has sacrificed the corporeal senses that have brought so much of a digression against natural and cosmic law. And of course she's decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, and this represents the wealth, the materiality of the human world, which has bound us so much and not turned us away, but never seeming to allow us time to know who we really are, or to remember, if we can say that. So the golden cup, of course, is wisdom. And she must drink of the wisdom in order to sacrifice the lesser nature so that the higher nature, purple, can ascend. And all this is going to take place, you see, because already the fact that she is on a scarlet beast tells us this. And upon her head, her forehead, a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. It isn't so much what this says, it's just simply that this represents a brand. And in the ancient days, to disfigure the body or to bring shame to the bearer, they branded them. And so this is rather like a mark or a brand. And it just simply says that who and what she is. That's all. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And this is where I saw the aspect of the soul, which had been bound to matter, had been so intoxicated by worldly enchantment, and knew not the good or the beneficent and the mystery of the indwelling Christ. And of course, when he saw her, he marveled in great admiration. And the angel said to me, Wherefore did thou marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath 7 heads and 7 horns. The beast thou sawest was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Ascend is the key word here. Which thou sawest was and is now means that it has always been this way, that we were brought into the corporeal world for the learning of our lessons. But on the other hand, life was not as it seemed. In other words, even though we were in darkness and unknowing, and that we followed the worldly ways, that was all as it had been written. So that's what it means when it was. And then we see the world as it is now. And then we know because she is wearing purple and red, she will sacrifice and she will ascend. The soul will ascend out of the bottomless pit. And it says go into perdition, which merely means that, remember, we're purifying the subconscious mind, which is numerous layers which the soul is wearing. So now it's going into perdition, continuing with the purification and the shedding of all of the adversities that have come since the beginning of time. And they that dwell upon earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Because human life is, but yet it is not as we perceive it. And although it has been represented by the dragon, it still was a cycle of necessity. So it was, and yet it is not. Human life is not what it seems, and yet it is. The corporeal life. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, in other words, 7 epochs, on which the woman sits. The soul has sat upon having, not so much sitting as we would think of sitting in a chair, but the soul has within it the prototype of its completion, to pass through every epoch of creation. And now we are shedding the 6th one to don the angelic robes of the world of tomorrow. And there are 7 kings, and of course that again is still 7 epochs. 5 are fallen, means the soul which is now enmeshed in the human world, you and I, in other words, enmeshed in the human world, have conquered 5 epochs of creation. I always tell my students that we so often think of ourselves without a sense of self-worth, and yet to have become human, every one of us have conquered 5 epochs. That's most of them. And now we are in the 6th, trying to graduate into that final. We've gone through a horrendous battle and difficulty and hardships to conquer those 5 epochs. And we can be proud of ourselves as a human race. But before we get too proud of ourselves, alas, we must move now into the 7th. So 5 kings are fallen. 1 is, that means human, and the other is not yet come, that time when human man graduates into divine man. And when he comes, he must continue for a short space. This tells us that after we have entered the 7th and final epoch, and we have rejoined or joined the groom, the Christ that is in us, we must live together upon earth and undo all the wrongs that we have done before it is finished. And by this I'm meaning to straighten the earth out and bring it to peace. And the beast that was and is not, he is the 8th. And that's a strange statement, because the beast represents, 8's always been looked at as kind of a war number. And I think we've mentioned this before. If you remember when we talked about the 144,000, we did it in this manner. that we put the descent of the soul into the world of matter, bound by the four elements, and that the indwelling Christ has been bound by the four elements. So now that represents the number 8, but in reality, in that number 8, we have still had 5 epochs. One is, and one is not yet. So the unity of this kind of represents, shall I say, kind of the soul and the spirit bound into unity, into oneness, and as a result then transcends and enters into the 7th epoch. So I rather look at the 7 epochs plus 1, the soul or the Christ, which must, the soul and the Christ, which must become one, is then the 8th. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. And remember, the corporeal nature has ruled over us and does rule over us until we have returned to one. So it is said, are 10 kings which have no kingdom as yet, because we, until we have returned to one, do not have the heavenly kingdom. And until we have the heavenly kingdom, we have no kingdom. Even though we have the kingdom of earth, even though we may have palaces, and great homes and yachts and all of these things, we still are a people without a kingdom. So it's said that we haven't received the kingdom yet, but we receive the power of kings because we've been allowed to move and to rule upon earth and to follow the way of self-will. And it said, as kings for 1 hour with the beast. And of course, 1 hour always represents the return to the one. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength to the beast. And this is the corporeal nature, which of course has given all of its power and strength to, what are those? What the dragon was ego. Then we had self-will, and which were the 2 primary facets, and then we had the mind. So as a result of this, they'll give their power and strength to the beast. So the ego and self-will have been the power of the beast. And they shall make war with the Lamb. And that tells us that our ego and our self-will is going to be in opposition of the desires or wants of that divine nature that is in us. We'd like to have it differently, but alas, we cannot bury 6 epochs overnight, or the habits instilled in us in 6 epochs overnight. We must be patient. A wise philosopher said, we must apply reasonable discipline, and beyond that, we must be merciful, even to ourselves. So they will make war upon the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, and thank heavens, we have this assurance that the ego and self-will will never be victorious, even if it goes on for thousands and thousands of years more. Still, the corporeal nature of mankind will lose. For he is the Lord of lords and the kings of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And once he has touched your heart, and I speak of this, the indwelling Christ, once you have awakened him and he has touched your heart, you will never wander from the path. There's something so compelling and so exciting and wonderful that regardless of how difficult it may get, we never leave it. And he said to me, the waters which thou saw, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. We've explained this. This is the entire world collectively. We are a part of a world family which constitutes each of us an aspect of the world soul. And the world soul constitutes an aspect of the universal soul. And the 10 horns which you saw upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. meaning that when we go to oneness with God, and at last we have come face to face with the indwelling Christ, at that time we shall turn away from the corporeal world and we shall hate the ways of the corporeal. We're not talking about day-to-day living. We're talking about the things that we did which were so adverse to the nature of God. And by this we can only say war and hatred and anger and jealousy and stealing and alcoholism and drug addiction and the things that took us into things that harmed us. And these words are said not with condemnation, because I too have been a human being who has had to, and who has changed, I have changed my life so drastically. So the things that were of the past I realized were harmful to myself, and they are harmful to us as a people. And the reason God does not condemn, but we have to eliminate them in order to come together in peace as a people. And shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. The fires of purification, the destruction of the impurities that are buried in the deep levels of the subconscious mind and the conscious mind and the corporeal world itself. For God has put in their hearts, in our hearts actually, to fulfill His will. And if you think that is so difficult, remember that God is an integral part of you. He is the essence that really gives you the power to think and to remember and to change. He holds your seed of greatness. That greatness that you will one day be when you walk upon the winds of time is Him. And so once you have surrendered the self-will to follow His path, then tomorrow it will be your books that will be the textbook of the college classes. It will be your experiments and discoveries and exploration and research that changes the world, because it is then that you have a power that you never possessed before. You have a strength to endure where you have never been able to endure before. I think when I was speaking on an international platform in Washington, D.C., I one time made the statement that I can promise you will have your moment of greatness upon the winds of time, as assuredly as this planet rotates around the sun. So He is your greatness. Without Him, nah. Temporal greatness. True greatness, never. So it's put into our hearts to fulfill His will and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast until His works should be fulfilled. Meaning, once again, we repeat that human life has been a cycle of necessity. He has put these things in the consciousness of human life in order for us to learn the unlearned lessons. And so, of course, until the words or the law has been fulfilled, until it is our moment upon the winds of time to leave the corporeal and earthly nature behind. I like meeting people and knowing that everyone I meet is someday going to be so great. And the woman which thou sawest is a great city which reigneth over the kings of earth. If you remember, she represented Babylon, and Babylon represented cities we talked about last week, like Seattle is beginning to get that way, Houston, Texas, Los Angeles, California, Detroit, Chicago. We have the city of Babylon many places, even in the United States, and certainly we have them all over the world. And that means deterioration, the pollution and things that we have brought upon our cities in the haste to move toward technology without the spiritual insight that maintains the true balance of nature. We have built great cities, but we have failed to build parks to compensate for the parks ever so often to compensate for concrete and what concrete does when it's exposed to hot weather, cold weather, and all of these things. It gives off no natural force by which to sustain people. And pretty soon we work in concrete buildings and walk on concrete walks, and we cannot understand why the world is, why it feels so heavy and why we're so tired and why we get depressed. If we had parks ever so often where we could go to of the good days and where we could draw in that regenerative part of nature, how much better off we would be. Those are just some of the examples that put us into that category. We've just been so wrapped up in technology and money that we've forgotten as a people about the other things. And that concludes that particular chapter, and we will be moving on to chapter 18, which we've all been waiting for, and that's the fall of the harlot. We go to Corinthians book 1, chapter 15, verses 45 to 49, as we start with this chapter. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Howbeit, that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterwards that which is spiritual. The first man is of earth, earthy. The second man is the Lord from heaven. As is the earthy, such are they also that are earthy, and as is the heavenly, such are they also that are heavenly. And as we have borne the image of the earthly, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. And I think that defines so much the fall of the harlot, because the first man, Adam, if we follow the original Hebrew, meant Adamic or ground. At the time when the soul and the spirit together entered into the Adamic ground and then was bound to darkness and unknowingness. So he said that the first was natural, but that which is natural, and afterwards that which is spiritual. He said the first man was of earth, and the second man is of the Lord. So now, having made our journey through matter, and having experienced and learned the lessons that are necessary for us to be able to progress, then comes the spiritual nature, that no longer both the spirit and the soul bound in matter, but the spirit and the soul resurrected from the dead, walking in the light of the Christ light. So as we have borne the image of the earthly, we also shall also bear the image of the heavenly. And I mentioned that to some degree it almost seems repetitious when we go through chapter 18, the fall of the harlot, because we have become so used to the symbolism as the weeks have passed. Lower nature, higher nature, corporeal, senses, mind, subconscious mind, soul, indwelling Christ. And so it seems as if when we go into this that we're merely saying the same thing. And in a way, we are. However, I always felt that John had a reason for doing everything that he did. And since he put this chapter into the scriptures, I have to assume that it has its important role. And of course, I would not leave it out for another reason, lest someone think for one moment that there was something in here that I might not understand. Wouldn't that be a tragedy? I say that with a smile on my face. They have been trying to prove me wrong for over a quarter of a century. In fact, one of my favorite television shows, the moderator was a Lutheran minister, and I did 3 shows with him. And the first one, he had put me with a Freudian-oriented psychiatrist and a retired Catholic priest. Well, they were unable to disprove anything that I said. So the next time he put me in with another Lutheran minister who had just graduated from theological school. We got along famously. Well, that didn't make a very good show. So the next time I came in to do the 3rd show, and I asked him, I said, who have you for me this time? He said, I have an associate professor of religion from the university. So I thought, oh, I have truly met my challenge now. So I am praying. I am saying, oh, please God, what should I do now? And so a voice spoke to me and said, stay on the resurrection of the dead. So I did stay on the resurrection of the dead, which is something that theology cannot and does not yet understand in the world of today. And needless to say, well, I won and he lost. And so that's why I had that smile on my face when I'd say, if I left a chapter, someone might think that I didn't know the answers. And we can't have that. All right. So we go now to chapter 18, the fall of the harlot, to verse 1. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his glory. And there are so many angels in the angelic kingdom, and there are so many great masters. And when they appear to us, their light is so bright by comparison of our light here upon earth. And I have been privileged to, of course, have been visited by a number of the great masters on the other side, and always they come in light, just like John did, St. John, when he came to work with me on Revelation. He had around him this great light, a great auric light, white and bright, and he stood in its center. So whatever they light and whatever they touch is glorious indeed. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen. The soul, having seen the great vision, now has surrendered self-will and the ego to the indwelling Christ, is fallen and becoming the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird, meaning that as Babylon falls and the lower nature falls away, it takes with it every uncleanness that we have ever had. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of earth have committed fornication, and the merchants of earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And when it talks about merchants, it's not talking about people in stores or that buy and sell for a living. It's talking about that how we have desired power over others and have led innocents to wars, and how people have waxed rich because of wars. At the time of World War II, or prior to World War II, I vaguely remember having heard this statement. And that statement said, whenever there is poverty over the world, there is a war and people become rich. That war is not caused by the people, but by those who rule over the people. I don't know how true that is, but I think it has some bearing. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sin, and that ye receive not her plagues. So it's saying, come out of, all you souls, come out of her, and don't follow the ways of weakness and corporeal senses and desires any longer. There is no happiness there. Oh, people, if you but knew those times, those occasional moments when the Spirit once more cast me into the corporeal world. And I'm just talking about maybe for a few seconds, that I might remember what we are like when we are just human. How dark is our world. How heavy is our world, and how filled with unhappiness. So we've turned away from the spiritual path because we have confused it with religion and with dogma, and so many times we don't want those kind of infringements. The spiritual path encompasses all religions and all philosophies and science. So you can wander freely through the religions of the world and the study of science and the study of all of the great philosophers who have passed through this resurrection of the dead. So we have so much, releases us and makes us so free. So let us not partake of this, but let us seek that spiritual path which takes us out of darkness into this remarkable world of light. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she has rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she has filled, fill her to double. Means now let us go out and to do good and to bring peace, and let us work twice as hard at this as we did when we followed the path that led us into darkness and unknowingness. I have a little footnote here that we'll read from the beginning of human descent into matter. The divine part of mankind, which is God, has called forth the soul to partake of the good and the beneficent. His instrument was the conscience. Unfortunately, the enticements of the corporeal world have been stronger, and the soul has remained drawn to its forbidden fruit, little realizing that one day it must atone for each indiscretion, or that its dreams and desires could only be realized through the resurrection of the dead. During this age of darkness, the soul has built up a depository of violations which descend as plagues under the precise law of cause and effect, resulting from the perpetual and forward movement of God's divine plan. So now as we withdraw to do twice as much good as we did bad, we leave Babylon desolate. How much she has glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her, for she has said in her heart, I sit as a queen and am no widow and shall see no sorrow. And the reason she says this is because a soul who is bound to the world of matter finds it impossible to perceive that they are doing wrong. It is our common custom to blame others for what we do, rather to look inside ourselves and to see what we did that may have caused the circumstances that's causing us trouble at this moment. We have been unable to accept or to believe or to realize that we do wrong. Unless there's, of course, murder or something like that. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, therefore shall her plagues come in one day death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. So she shall come into desolation, because stronger is the power of God in us than the weaknesses of our flesh. And the kings of earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. And it is sometimes that as we start making a transformational change and we try to build our life to the life of the good, we sometimes may look backwards and remember the delicious enticements of the past. But they will not hold us, because we will see the fallacy. Do you know that a desire is the most amazing thing? I remember when I was so grateful to just have a tent while I was on tour, two-man tent. Then I felt rocks sticking in my back one night, and I thought surely I should get me a $2 or $3 air bed, not bed, but an air thing, so a mat to sleep on. That was wonderful till the mat started losing air every night, and the rock still stuck me in the back. So I decided that I really needed to get a real good air mat. I did that. Then I was waking up cold in the morning, and oh, how pleased I was when I finally got a little $12 kind of metal blanket to warm me, so I threw it over my inexpensive sleeping bag. Now I'm in heaven, I'm warm. But then I decided that I should have a larger tent because I couldn't barely sit up in the one I had. And then from a two-man tent, I needed one I could stand up in. It goes on and on. Desires never stop. We can never fulfill them. We have to somewhere, someplace, make a decision to get off of the train. And so we just simply have lamented over those, and then we see the fallacies, the problems these things have caused us. We then just turn away again, never to turn back, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for 1 hour is thy judgment come." So when we have come into oneness with God, the indwelling Christ, then the 1 hour, the rest is done away, and the merchants of earth shall weep and mourn over her. For no man buyeth their merchandise any more, for we will not go in the ways of the corporeal world, will not partake of hatred or discord. We will not buy yachts when there are starving people in the world. We'll not build 100-room homes when there are people who are homeless. These are the things we just won't do anymore. So we will not partake of that. You know, there was a beautiful poem that was written by St. John of the Cross in his book, and I want to close this week with that poem, because it's all about exactly what we've been talking about. He called it his poem on creation. And if you remember, St. John of the Cross was not St. John the Beloved, but was one that came afterwards, about the same time of St. Teresa of Avila, who passed through the dark night of the soul and went on to leave his glorious interpretation of Revelation in the form of a book called Dark Night of the Soul. He also wrote extensive poetry. So I wish he's speaking as God would speak to us. And I'm not speaking of St. John, but the poetry is God speaking to you and I. I wish to give you, my son, a bride who will love you, who will merit our company because of your worth. And remember, his son is the divine nature in you. The bride is your own soul. And God is the one who gave to you the indwelling Christ. And eat my own bread at my own table, and share the gifts that with my son I share. Let her rejoice with me in your grace and youth. I am very grateful, Father, replied the son, to the bride that you will give me. I would give my fire that by it she may see the greatness of my Father, and how the being I have had its birth in his being. In other words, how much a part the indwelling Christ is of God, and how much God is the indwelling Christ. I will cover her with my arms, so that she may burn in your love, and she shall exalt your goodness with eternal joy. As the soul surrenders to the indwelling Christ and becomes good. And so it be then, said the Father, for your love deserves it. And as soon as this was said, the earth came into existence. A palace he built for the bride, designed with love and wisdom, divided into 2 quarters, one high and one low. The lower was built with infinite variety, while the higher was covered with precious stones shining with beauty, so the bride might know the bridegroom she had married. In the higher one he placed the angelic hierarchy, and humans were given the lower part to inhabit, for the human condition is less worth than the angelic. Though beings and places he divided in this manner, all formed one single body of the bride, just betrothed. I'll be with you next week. I want to thank you for being with us during this exciting journey into St. John's Apocalypse. Jesus once said, there shall be no peace among people till there be one garden of the brotherhood over earth. So come, let you and I work together for this common cause, that the great age of mankind can come into existence. Until we meet again, peace be with you.